Meeting to order. I'd like to welcome the Minister here and as well as department staff to answer questions. Just want to remind the members that the meeting is televised, and after the first hour, I know the Minister has cabinet later on, have to go, but we do have some committee business that we have to deal with. Shouldn't take long in relation to our study in the budget. So we'll have to go into camera at that point. So with no further ado, Ms. Raitt, I'll turn it over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, it's great to be here today. It's nice to see everybody. I'm going to take us through our main estimates and our supplementary C estimates. But first, I'd like to introduce who's at the table with me. I have the Deputy Minister, Louis Levesque. I have the Associate Deputy Minister, Ms. Elena Borges, and I have our CFO for Transport Canada, Mr. Andre Lapointe. I'm really grateful for the committee's work and its ongoing input on the transportation issues, and I continue to look forward to collaboration. I want to thank you for finishing up with C3 in a very expeditious manner and moving it through to the next stages so that we can continue moving that one through on a fast pace. So I'm grateful for the committee's great work on that. My officials and I are here to help explain how the funding that we're seeking is going to be a benefit to Canadians. And as you know from the documents, that we are seeking authorities in the amount of $1.656 billion. The authorities that we're seeking for our 2014-2015 main estimates are going to be directed to support some key priorities within our department. These are the priorities. First, we will continue to refine and strengthen safety and security oversight for the entire transportation system. Second, we're going to continue to contribute to our government's responsible resource development agenda. Third, we want to improve Canada's competitiveness and its critical transportation infrastructure. Fourth, we will ensure that Transport Canada policies, programs, and activities meet the needs of the transportation system in the long term. And finally, we will adopt our government's efficiency and renewal measures. I'm going to focus the rest of my opening remarks on some particular efforts that we have within Transport Canada. These are tanker safety, investment in key transportation infrastructure projects as part of our gateways and corridor strategy, and of course, rail safety. So turning to tanker safety, we are strengthening our tanker safety regime because we know it protects Canadians and the environment both today and tomorrow. And we are anticipating higher growth in marine shipping for oil in Canadian waters. So in the main estimates, you'll note that we are requesting additional authorities in the amount of $15.8 million for world-class oil spill response. Now, this is a 686% increase from the authorities that were sought in last year's main estimates. What the regime is based on is this. We want to stop spills from happening in the first place. We want to clean them up if they ever happen. And thirdly, we want to hold polluters liable for those spills. This regime introduced new measures such as increased inspections of foreign tankers in Canadian waters, expanded air surveillance and monitoring of ships in our waters, a new incident command system to allow the Canadian Coast Guard to respond more effectively to incidents. And to help us achieve a world-class tanker safety system, we have an independent expert panel which was led by Gordon Houston, who's the former CEO of Port Metro Vancouver. The panel submitted its first report in November, and it made 45 recommendations on how to strengthen the oil spill preparedness and response regime. Now, we take this panel report very seriously, and we are engaging communities in the marine industry and provincial governments about the recommendations that the panel put forth. But the panel's work is going to continue. It's reviewing oil tanker safety measures in the Arctic, as well as marine transport of hazardous and noxious substances. So I do expect to get a second and final report later this year. Now, just recently I was in British Columbia, and I was able to fly in one of the planes that's operated by our National Air Surveillance Program and meet the team who does that work for us. And it's quite the experience because it really did give me an opportunity to appreciate the importance of having those eyes in the sky, to see what's happening in the water in very fast time, and just see the great work that's being done in this program. And I'm really happy that we're doubling funding for the program. And what that allows the team to do is to significantly increase the number of hours the planes are in the air so that we can better monitor our coasts and ultimately deter potential polluters. And I would tell you as well, one thing I was told by the team is that they were actually the experts that were brought down to the Gulf when we had the incident with respect to Deep Horizon and the spills. They were the ones that were the eyes in the sky for the United States. They were the ones providing all the data because we had that and the United States didn't. So I'm very proud of this program, and I know the great work that they do. Turning to transportation infrastructure projects, Economic Action Plan 2014 recognizes both the importance of trade and investment to Canada's economic future. And the role of Canada's transportation system and infrastructure network is to support domestic and international trade in those markets. Through the main estimates, we're seeking $702 million, and that's going to support some important infrastructure projects through the Gateways and Corridors Funding Program. We focus on supporting international trade with the U.S. and other key partners by ensuring integrated and efficient transportation systems across all modes. We have to work with the other levels of government and the private sector to do so, and we're investing in important infrastructure projects at border crossings, and we're bolstering our efforts to coordinate infrastructure investment planning as part of our government's Beyond the Border initiative. We know that if we improve at the border, cross-border trade will go a long way to ensuring a continued economic growth for Canada. And finally, I'd like to turn my attention to what is my top priority, and that's railway safety improvements. You know, in the aftermath of Lac-Mégantic, our government took 3 elements of railway safety and focused on them, and very much like the world-class tanker system: prevention, preparedness and response, and liability and compensation. One of the first things that happened was that Transport Canada directed rail companies to enhance the safety and security of their operations and to revise rules to apply to all freight trains and equipment, not just to locomotives. Our government's also accelerating development and amendments of regulations that are based on the recent amendments to the Railway Safety Act, and include in those regulations to require railway companies to obtain railway operating certificates once they've met baseline safety requirements, as well as allowing for the administrative monetary penalties, because that adds an extra and an additional enforcement tool in the Act. Transport Canada is also accelerating the development of railway grade crossing regulations. The regulations were published in Canada Gazette Part 1 on February 8 for a 90-day comment period. And when we do these things, what we're saying is that we are committed to safe rail transportation system, not only for our communities, but as well, in general, for Canada's economic well-being. We have directed companies that import or offer for transport crude oil to conduct classification testing of that oil and make the results available to Transport Canada. We've directed them to update their safety data sheets that they provide to the Department's Canadian Transportation Emergency Centre, or Canatech. Our actions on railway safety have also included working with the other federal stakeholders. And while the Transportation Safety Board of Canada continues to investigate the Lac-Mégantic derailment, it has delivered 3 key recommendations to improve the transportation of dangerous goods by rail, and will provide its final report later this year. And on the last part, with respect to liability and compensation, I really do feel strongly that we have to hold polluters accountable for accidents, and that as Canadians, we should not be expected to cover the cost of damages. So to this end, Transport Canada is consulting stakeholders on how to strengthen the existing liability and compensation regime for rail. We want to make sure that in the event of an incident, there are sufficient resources available to adequately compensate victims, to pay for cleanup costs, and to protect taxpayer funds. This complements recent consultations by the Canadian Transportation Agency into the insurance coverage it requires of federally regulated railway companies when they issue their certificates of fitness to them. And to improve prevention, we have published for comment new regulatory standards for the DOT 111 rail cars. These standards include thicker steel for the cars, added top fittings, and head shield protection. As well, Transport Canada has received and published reports from 3 industry-led working groups who were asked to examine various factors relating to the transportation of dangerous goods, and officials are reviewing these reports now. And you have to work with the United States, because both countries need to ensure that the appropriate testing requirements and criteria for crude oil shipments are similar, and that they apply proposed new and more stringent tank car construction standards to a broader range of products. Finally, I want to assure the committee that our response standards on the transportation of crude oil are as rigorous as they need to be, given the increased volume of oil being shipped by rail. And to achieve this, Transport Canada is working with the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Advisory Council to develop requirements for the Emergency Response Assistance Plan for crude oil. Now, while all of these actions demonstrate how we are working to strengthen the safety of railway transportation together, we have to remember that in general, statistics do show that Canada has one of the safest transportation systems in the world. And what we're doing is just reinforcing a great system, and to ensure that safety remains a priority. The initiatives that I've outlined today demonstrate our government is working to maintain transportation that is safe, it's secure, it's efficient, and environmentally responsible. We do take this responsibility seriously, and we do welcome input from the committee regarding these efforts. So that concludes my remarks, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. And we'll now move to Ms. Madam Boutin. Oh, Mr. Meyer.
Yep.
Okay, I was going, but
Merci
You're
beaucoup,
splitting.
Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to Madam Minister. Madam Minister, yes. I have a question, if I may. You've already mentioned the issue of rail safety, lac mégantic, the DOT 111s, that there were 3 reports in question, one dealing specifically with the tankers, the rail cars, and that the Transportation Safety Agency has already made some concerns, expressed some concerns some time ago that it was a problem many years ago. I understand that you're working with our partners to the south. Can you tell us if we have a timetable for the withdrawal from service of these rail cars? 5 years, 10 years? Perhaps you could give us some specific information on that. It's quite an important issue.
Term means of containment of how you're moving the dangerous goods. So if you take a look at the studies that we've published that came back from the Advisory Council, you can see that there's some similarities, but nobody gives a timeline in there. So it really is up to us in Transport Canada to determine what we think is a good starting point for the discussion. In the U.S., they're having discussions around a 10-year time frame. That's too long. That is too long. We do agree on that. We also agree that we have to phase out those earlier DOT 111 models. I mean, some of these cars are 40 years old, built in 1974. So we take the matter really seriously. We are in the process of digesting what's in those reports, and officials are preparing to consult with industry on the timeline. But I am mindful of the fact that we have heard back from the Transportation Safety Board on this matter in January, that I have statutorily 90 days to report to the Transportation Safety Board. So there are some clear deadlines for me, and we are working towards those for sure.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais venir sur Post Canada.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to Canada Post. On the 11th of December 2013, there was a 5-point action plan proposed by Canada Post. And the reason that we're discussing with that here is I don't know that there was that much consultation with the stakeholders and partners, the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, others. Few people were consulted. For commercial mail, it's one issue.
Canada Post is not part of the mains, nor was it part of the opening comments. Oh, I'm sorry, was it?
On that point of order,
Fair enough. I stand
part of
corrected.
the main.
Sorry.
That's
It
why I
wasn't in her
mentioned
opening
the 22.
comments is what I meant to say.
That's when I mentioned the $22 million from the start. Alors donc, un des problèmes qui
So one of the issues that we have with businesses, particularly small businesses, an increase of 15 to 35% for commercial mail, which is a major source of income for Canada Post. Now, we're led to understand that there would be a 6% erosion. That's 800 and some employ jobs, 5,000 perhaps if we're looking at the multiplier effect within small business, because they haven't had time to accommodate this 15 to 35% increase in their mailing costs and their postage costs. I believe that you might have studied the impact that this might have on SMEs and perhaps charitable organizations when you looked at the Canada Post 5-point action plan.
Post is in here, and the purpose, because we do have $22.2 million that go from the government to Canada Post, because they're supposed to be self-sufficient, but we do so because we want to make sure that we can continue to deliver parliamentary mail and material for use of the blind. And I know the opposition knows all about the use of franking in our government. To answer the question, though, I will say that Canada Post is facing the realities of their decreased mail volume, and they have developed a 5-point plan, which they consulted on. They consulted across the country. They went to town halls.
Merci beaucoup.
Yeah.
Excusez-moi de vous couper, c'est juste que je sens qu'on n'aurait pas.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I feel that we're not really going to get a very detailed action on the 5-point plan. So I'll move on to something else. Infrastructure. When we're talking about investment in infrastructure, has the Canadian government taken into consideration the spin-offs for manufacturing sectors. I'm thinking of the bridges in particular. Our neighbors, the United States, and even other countries like China, they have a policy of Buy American. Do we have a similar policy?
If she wants to respond to
Maybe on that point of order, the minister actually mentioned trade and investment support, and that's part of what Transport Canada is doing. So,
Okay.
Merci. Donc, je voulais vérifier si oui ou non on a.
I'd like to just confirm if we have a policy to ensure that the benefits, economic benefits, when we talk about the Champlain bridge, for example, will the steel be sourced in Quebec or in Canada or elsewhere?
Bridge, although my officials at the table can answer the question to it, I have the Detroit River International Crossing, and that is subject to a series of agreements between ourselves and the United States. I guess I would look to my officials on the specifics of that one, because there has been a lot of discussion already around the Detroit River Bridge.
Les travaux d'infrastructure qui vont être financés par à la fois le plan d'infrastructure.
The infrastructure plans which will be financed either by the new bridge fund or for the infrastructure programs themselves, Canada Build, will provide opportunities to Canadian businesses to bid on this, of course, but in the context of our international engagements and commitments. No, but is there or is there not a policy that says that there has to be some economic benefits to Canadian Canadian companies? Because, you know, let's compare that to the Buy American policy. We have or we don't have a policy.
We take the view that...
Okay.
There we go. Okay. We take the view that investment is important in order to ensure that we're helping with the borders and stuff. And we do expect that the spin-off effects will be beneficial for Canadians in general, but we also need to balance that with getting the best value and ensuring that we have an open process in procurement. So those things go into it. With respect to the closing of our borders or the shrinking of our world, in terms of a policy to favor one over another, we don't have that. We believe in ensuring that we have general procurement that abides by transparency, accountability, and best value for the dollar, and including, we are very confident in our Canadian companies' ability to compete. We're very good at it.
You're just right. Your time is just running out now.
The point of orders that I had.
We didn't take that away from you. If you have one last comment, I'll
Well,
allow
the
it.
last
Well,
comment
just
wa-
a few seconds.
Yeah, just a few seconds for Madame Boutin.
Oui, ben, j'avais plusieurs questions au sujet des infrastructures.
Well, I had many questions on infrastructure, but I guess they're policy issues, and apparently the minister can't respond to these. Build Canada has certain policies towards PPPs or federal participation in some of these projects. But as the witnesses are not able to answer these questions, I'd like to propose the following motion. That the Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities invite the Honourable Denis Lavelle, Minister of this program, to deal with the budget on these items, Part 3, 2014-2015, and that this meeting be televised.
Bhutan Suite, Mr. LaBelle was asked, couldn't attend today, but indicated that he could. Pardon me? No, I realize that. I'm just giving it for your information. So on my last discussion with them, they're trying to come up with a date. So that's okay. We now go to Mr. McGinney, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Minister. Good morning, officials. Thanks for being here. Minister, we've only got 7 minutes together. I wish we had more time. Minister, I've always believed that government has an obligation to get the big things right. And I know that you would agree with me that anyone can talk a good game, governments can talk a good game, cabinets can, ministers can, but I've always believed in following the money. Because if you want to know where a government's priorities are, follow the money. So I'm going to ask you a couple of very pointed questions, if I could. I'm going to put to you some numbers from your public accounts of last fall. Aviation safety was cut 11% from 222 to 198 million. Marine safety was cut 25%, from 75 to 56 million. Road safety was cut 5.5%, from 23 to 22 million. Now, I do acknowledge rail safety did see a paltry increase from 32 to 34 million, but I would put it to Canadians, you're spending more on economic action plan advertising, 42 million this year, 42 million, compared to 34 million on rail safety. Minister, how do you explain these cuts to safety?
Well, okay.
Just for clarity on the numbers and the actions that have been taken, in the case of aviation safety, it's important to note there's been a movement of an element of spending from one element of the program activity architecture to another element, which is the program that we have to help airports with in terms of safety improvements. So that reflects fundamentally the change. So it's not really a decline in terms in spending in that area. I would remind members that as was said prior to or at the time of implementation of the Deficit Reduction Action Plan, there were no reductions to direct oversight positions in the department on aviation safety, on marine safety, on rail safety, and on...
So there have been no cuts to safety expenditures? Because of time, sir, you'll understand. If I had 70 minutes, we would have a much longer discussion.
But I'm telling you...
We've got 7 minutes to dance together.
The cuts were directed at the overhead in the department.
Right.
There were no cuts to safety activities in the department.
Okay. Next question. This talks about some more numbers. The Auditor General's report said that the number of employees it needed that Transport Canada needed to oversee the SMS is implemented by the 31 federal railways on a 3-year cycle required an estimate of 20 system auditors, 20 auditors to audit each railway once every 3 years. According to the department, there are currently 10 qualified inspectors for conducting audits. With the current workforce, the department has conducted very few audits, only 26% of the audits that Transport Canada itself said it needed to have completed. At this pace, it's going to take many, many years before the department audits all key components of SMS regulations and key safety systems. It's going to take even longer, Minister, now that the department is to oversee some key components of 39 additional non-federal railways. So here's the question. Minister, how many qualified inspectors does Transport Canada currently have on staff?
Well, I'm going to turn to my officials on the actual number because they have a better hand on that. But I will say that it gives me the opportunity, and with my officials at the table here, it's important to note that when the Auditor General's report came out, it was very clearly put to us that we need to do better. And we talked to the officials about that, and they've developed a plan to move forward. But I think it's important that we do acknowledge the fact that those were good recommendations from the Auditor General, and that we do need to move forward better. With respect to the number of inspectors, I'll ask my deputy.
Yeah, just very quickly, Minister, just a number. How many do we have?
Back to your question on in terms of audits. Clearly, the report of the Auditor General indicated that the department needs to do a better job at audits.
I respect, Mr. Levesque, your need to clarify. I just need a number. How many do we have?
We have about 100 inspectors in terms directly on rail, but that doesn't include all the oversight positions. Specifically on that, what we are doing is putting in place a clear action plan that will increase not only the number of inspectors, but as you mentioned, we need to have people that are able to do audits of systems in order to fully implement safety management systems exactly as recommended by the Auditor General.
So you've gone from 10 qualified inspectors to 100?
No. In terms of rail safety inspectors, we have about 100 inspectors.
Right.
What the AG is saying, you should have more people that have the skills to do audits.
Right. So how many of those people do you have?
I would have to find you the exact number we have at this point.
That would be great. I appreciate that.
But the instructions to the department are to staff the required position and implement the action plan that is being put together after the Auditor General report.
Minister, the next number I want to put to you is the $5 billion disaster in the Canadian grains industry. I think it's fair. I think it's fair to state that your government set this in motion. The elimination of the wheat board was supposed to provide more opportunities, according to your Prime Minister. He's got many quotes on the record about getting the trains moving, and I don't know whether you've been meeting with farmers, Minister, about this crisis. But one of the things and one of the questions put to you in the House of Commons yesterday was basically that more than a year ago, your government was warned that your new law would not work because there's no clear definition of services, no objective way to measure success or failure, no liquidated damages payable to farmers when the railways screw up, as they are right now. We've got ships sitting empty off the coast of British Columbia. We've got billions of dollars of grains sitting stockpiled in Canadian farm settings, and we can't connect these dots. Now, you've got all the necessary amendments to fix this mess. They've already been drafted. So the question that was put to you yesterday is, are you prepared today or tomorrow, before the House rises for 2 weeks, to deal with this crisis, to bring those amendments forward in the House for unanimous consent so we can get this done by tomorrow before the House adjourns?
I get to answer? Okay, thank you. With all due respect to my learned colleague and friend over there, amendments that have been proposed will not address some fundamental issues we have here. And the fundamental issue that we have to focus on is the fact that we have a crop this year that is 33% higher than it's ever been. And it's great for farmers. And the frustration for the farmers is the capacity of the railway isn't there to be able to move that to market. And you know, I feel for the farmers.
Why is the capacity not there, Minister?
Mr. McGinney, your time is up.
Can I, you know what, I'm going to answer all your questions because I think it's a good opportunity to explain from our point of view in Transport Canada what our analysis is of what has occurred. Because in order to be able to learn how to fix going forward, you have to understand the problem. And there seems to be a focus on amendments to the rail services freight, the Fair Rail Freight Services Act from last year, which is a different conversation, but not the one that addresses our problem here right now. The railways provide a capacity for a normal year, a 5-year average, as they do so when they're putting their business plans together. Unfortunately, and fortunately, because it's a two-sided coin there, we have a great harvest, and the farmers did extraordinarily well in bringing in production. And we do expect that rail should have the capacity to have a surge, a swing on how much they can provide. That was exacerbated by the weather that we have seen this year. -25 and below causes trains to have to be shortened, and it has concerns with respect to people's health and safety and working in operations. So we ended up having the situation with a huge crop, 33% more, which if you take a look at it, it's 17 million tons more. It's 20 million tons more than what we normally would have seen. That would mean 10 million tons for each railway to carry, because it's about 50-50 in grain in the country. And that exceeds the entire potash, for example, industry in 1 year, in just one fell swoop. So what we've done is we've met with CN and CP CEOs on Saturday, and we went through what they can do and how many cars they can move, and they understand the urgency. And of course, I have met with Canadian Federation of Agriculture, I've met with the grain companies. But you know, the Fair Rail Freight Services Act was passed last year for the purpose of having shippers and railways to communicate with each other in order to ensure that we have a smooth system. And that legislation has not been utilized by grain or by the railways up to this point. And that's a difficulty, but we'd like to see that utilized, and more importantly, we'd like to see the railways start accelerating how much they're moving in the prairies right now, and they've indicated that they would do so.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Komarnicki, 7 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Minister, with your officials. Certainly the transportation file has been very active of the last particular while. I come from the prairies, Saskatchewan and southeast Saskatchewan in particular, and there's no doubt we have the Bakken oil field, which has increased oil transport by rail. We have, of course, potash in the riding as well, and we have long stacks of rail cars for delivering potash. And of course, we've had, as you've stated, and Mr. McGinty stated, a bumper crop, a prairie term for a very bountiful harvest. And in Saskatchewan, we've seen our economy sort of increase exponentially, 70% since 2007. And last year, the province posted a record oil production of 177 million barrels. And of course, the oilseeds and grain crop, 38.4 million tons. And we are hearing from farmers, from elevator companies, and they're quite frustrated in terms of not getting the car spots that they want. They're not being able to load and deliver the cars to ports while ships wait at port. And of course, there are markets for the commodities, markets that are anxious to receive the product, and farmers are being concerned about the fact of not being able to deliver, and the fact that it's becoming to affect their bottom line. And of course, they have cash flow problems, and they realize it's winter, but in Saskatchewan, winters generally do get cold, and they're wondering what might be done in the short term, because obviously they need to deal with this particular harvest. And they're also looking at, in terms of some long-term solutions, in the sense that this problem isn't going to go away even if the bumper crop is delivered. There are a lot of things happening in the prairies that are exponentially increasing demand, and the question they have is whether or not there is capacity there, and what transport might or might not do going forward. So two questions. Firstly, with the current grain backlog short term, what is being done, what can be done, and on a more longer term, is there something we can do? And I know you mentioned in your opening remarks that it needs to meet, rail needs to meet the transportation needs going forward in our economy. So go ahead, Minister. There's a lot in there.
I appreciate the question. I think what it shows is that everybody's very concerned with respect to what's happening right now. And as I said, it's hard to read the stories about farmers who are having difficulties with cash flow, and it's hard to read those stories because they have done so good. They have provided wonderful bounty for us, as you pointed out, and the frustration is there about moving it in the short term. So if I could focus on short term and long term. In the short term, we do have a serious matter, because we do have what's going to be a carryover into the next year, because the laws of physics can only mean that you can move a certain amount of grain in a certain amount of time based upon what infrastructure the rail has. They do understand the issue. They understand the problem. Minister Ritz has been meeting with officials for weeks. I have been meeting with officials at the railways as well, too. And what we need from them is to tell us what is their highest capacity that they can run, and that they do run that capacity. And that's the way we can do in the short term, move the grain, and work with the elevators, and work with the terminals, and work with the ports to ensure that that moves as smoothly as possible. So we don't have a situation where you have 200 cars sitting on a siding waiting to go into a terminal because they're waiting for a different train to come in as well too, because those orders have to go out first. So the chain has to have capacity, the chain has to have direction, and those are the things that you work in terms of operations with those two entities, the grain companies as well as the shipper, as well as the rail companies. But in the longer term, if I may, what it has shown is that we do have a constriction in our supply chain that wasn't able to deal with two things: an increased amount, and secondly, a weather with intensity that we had not seen before in terms of operations. One of the things that came out of the Fair Rail Freight Service Act was we would set up a commodity supply chain table and ensure that there would be discussions there, and that there would be as well another group that came out of agriculture to deal with grain as well too. And those tables have to work, and they have to work together. You know, for 100 years there has been this tension between railways and grain companies, because everybody wants it shipped as fast as possible. And it is the government's role to give good policy overall to smooth that out and ensure that the producers do get their grain to market, that they do get their product to market as well too. So with the table that we're setting up, that we'll be announcing soon, from the Rail Freight Service Act, the Fair Rail Service Act, and as well working with the companies now. But as Minister Ritz pointed out in the House yesterday, all options are being considered right now just because of the real impact it's having on farmers in the West and the real concerns. So when we come to a position on the options we have before us, we'll be in a place to be able to announce those, and that's not right now.
And I appreciate that, but and when we look at just the general trends, I had a constituent write to me, and he basically draws to my attention, notwithstanding the bountiful harvest, he's indicating that the trend lines on his farm, because of a variety of reasons, have been trending upward. So production has been on an upward incline. Our oil production in Saskatchewan has been an upward incline, and of course the Bakken field itself has posed some challenges. Potash also, everything's sort of trending upwards. And the big question is, and everyone wants to know, is there a capacity issue that needs to be addressed? Is someone looking at that fact? Now, obviously, we have two rail companies, so there's not that many options. And we're having trade deals signed fairly frequently these days, essentially with the idea that we would be able to get our product to foreign markets. And we're sort of a landlocked country, particularly in the prairies. The only way to move a lot of our product is by rail, and we only have two rail companies. So is somebody looking at the capacity issue long term? I'm talking now 5-10 years, and saying, do we have what we need to meet that? And it appears it needs some substantial action to be able to take it to the new level, to the new century of what's happening with our country and with our economy.
As I said in my opening remarks, it's an excellent question. Our role in Transport Canada is to be able to underscore and enforce our government's responsible resource development plan. And that includes what we currently have in our logistics chain. And we expect and we want our logistics chain to grow to make sure that it can handle the prosperity that we want to build for our country. And that's what we do every day in government, is try to build jobs and growth and long-term employment, and through our resources and through our agriculture. And we can't have that step in the middle that doesn't allow us to action on what we've been planning for. So the deputy has some numbers, though, that he was going to provide to you.
I just want to go back to what the minister said at the beginning, to put things in context for the committee. A typical crop for over the last 5 years in the prairies has been around between 50 and 55 million tons in total. Last year's crop was 76 million tons. And of the crop, typically, depends in year over year, but there's about 35 million that's actually going for exports. So really, and obviously all the additional crop is not going to get consumed in North America. That's to go for export. So it's just the size of the increase, around 20 million tons, to the size of what's actually getting done, typically, which is between 30 and 40 million tons. It's a massive increase. But it's very clear that in terms of the capacity of the system has to be increased. And the rail companies have announced significant investments into new capacity, in terms to increase over time. But really, the issue we're facing is the speed at which these things can come online versus the simple fact is what 20 million more tons harvested last year than there are typically. So this is definitely a huge challenge.
Okay, thank you. Minister, not very often I ask a question from the chair, but just to follow up on the discussion about capacity, and you may or may not want to comment on this, but I know that yourself or Minister Ritz, you can't go and tell farmers or shippers where to ship their product, obviously. But I've had it pointed out to me a couple times by people that I would say in the know that are basically implying that the Port of Thunder Bay and the Great Lakes are maybe not being utilized to, to their best. Maybe it's fairly close for wheat out of, say, Manitoba, or maybe even the eastern part of Saskatchewan, to go towards Thunder Bay and out through the Great Lakes. So I don't know whether you want to comment on that, but is that an option that's worth looking at?
You know, we have to maximize whatever way we have to move the grain. There's no question. But you're right. Certain farmers want to sell to where they want to sell in terms of markets, so that's important. So what we have right now, we have certain corridors we can use. And it seems to be that the easiest corridor to move, the fastest corridor to move, is, of course, going to the West Coast, Prince Rupert or Port Metro Vancouver, and all the terminals that have been built out in there. We also have other ways. We have Churchill, which is utilized sometimes. We have a U.S. route. We can go to the East Coast directly into Halifax and along the way there. And as well, we have Thunder Bay and utilize marine mode of transport in order to move it out of the system. Ideally, all of these modes work. And ideally, that allows us to move as quickly as we can, as much grain as we can. One of the things that was mentioned, that wasn't mentioned yet, is the way the markets work this year, and what became clear as well too, is it's one thing to plan for what is a normal crop. It's another thing to plan that we exceed it, and whatever percentages you can talk about it. But when all the orders come in at the same time, and you know, normally you can run about 4,200 cars per railway to the West Coast. When an order comes in for 7,200 cars, you can see that there is a discrepancy in terms of what's possible and what's not. But that, you know what, I'm not here to be apologetic for the railways. Our role in Transport Canada is to ensure that we understand the chain and that we do as much as we can to ensure that we balance that relationship. And what we want in the government is for economic prosperity for everybody, and that we get to move our product to market. And that's what we're going to continue to work on. And I'm glad you mentioned Thunder Bay, Mr. Chair, because it is a viable alternative and it is a place. Now, of course, the Great Lakes are frozen right now, so it is one that is limited by weather. It's great to be in Canada, but absolutely, you know, utilization of all our modes and just continue to do what we're doing well in the world. We're number 8 in the world in terms of wheat. And, you know, I'd like to move up on that list.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Watson, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for mentioning the H2O highway through the Great Lakes. Record ice this year, actually. It's up, and requests for ice breaking out are up almost 25% on the Great Lakes. Chair, I have a couple of brief comments, and then I'll be splitting my time with Ms. Young. First of all, with respect to Mr. Mai and the issue of Canadian content on the project that we're responsible for, which is the DRIC. We do have a waiver from Buy American provisions, which will allow both U.S. and Canadian steel on a very important project between our two nations. It's rare that I find myself agreeing with Mr. McGuinty, but following the money is very important. In fact, I think there's a committee and an Auditor General in Ontario who are following the money on the cancellation of 2 gas plants there, but I digress for a moment. Mr. Levesque, my question, the Airport Capital Assistance Program, which is really critical for smaller airports, particularly to ensure that they're up to a high level of safety as per what they're regulated to do. If we were to follow Mr. McGuinty's narrative, that program was eliminated entirely. That's not the case, is it, Mr. Levesque?
No.
No. In fact, it's being accounted for rather than under the aviation safety rubric under transportation infrastructure. Is that correct?
Correct. I'll ask Elena to answer that.
Okay. I have the answer to that, which is yes. And that's important because we're dealing with infrastructure improvements that include everything from runway and taxiway improvements, important lighting investments, aircraft firefighting equipment, and the list goes on and on. So in fact, aviation safety with that program is being entirely preserved. And in fact, I know that doesn't fit the opposition narrative about cuts, but in fact, overall spending in the estimates is up for the department 9.5%, almost 10%. Is that correct? That is correct. Okay. Mr. Chair, my questions are done. I'll defer to Ms. Young.
Okay, Ms. Young.
Thank you so much, Minister, for being here today, and to the department representatives. I wanted to, coming from British Columbia myself, talk about some things that are important to us out there on the West Coast, and that is, of course, the world-class tanker safety system. But on top of that, I wanted to follow that up with a couple of other questions, so I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up in case we don't get there, in case, you know, you want to do some prep. So the second question I want to ask is around the Clean Water for Transportation program, and then after that, the gas tax. So regarding the world-class tanker safety program, I know in my constituency, many people come up to me and say, what is this? You know, like, why, how can you assure us that this is a world-class tanker safety program and that these aren't just words? So I just wanted to give the minister and the department staff an opportunity to answer, why is this program needed? Why do we know that Canada needs this program? What are the changes that are being made to assure British Columbians and Canadians that this is a world-class tanker safety program?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. It's something that our government took seriously, and it was announced actually last year by Minister LaBelle and Minister Oliver. And we've been talking about it in the context of we're recognizing the fact we're going to see an increased shipping on the West Coast. But the reality is that, shipping happens on all of our coasts, and it's important to ensure that we have the rules and regulations and the systems in place in order to protect if there is an incident. So you start with prevention, and in prevention, you just make sure that you inspect the vessel as it comes in, a foreign vessel coming into waters, to make sure that they are seaworthy, that they're not going to have an accident, that they're not going to spill. And we also ensure that that they understand where our markers are, where our channels are, that the Coast Guard has a mapping and they understand what's going on there. On the second piece of it is, but if there is a spill or somebody is leaking or it is not seaworthy, that we can see it quickly. And that's where the national NASP, we call it National Aeronautics Security Program, comes in. And it's really important to know when something is happening so that you can respond to it quickly. And I think a lot of British Columbians worry about that because the coast is beautiful and they don't want it to spoil. And we know that if we get to it quickly and are prepared to deal with a spill, that's going to make us world class as well too. The other things that have to happen within the safety initiative are things that not necessarily involved with Transport Canada, but things like doing some research on non-conventional petroleum products to make sure that we understand what it behaves like in the water so that we have the appropriate spill response there as well too. So with the increase of shipping that is going to be coming to the BC coast, it was important to show Canadians that we have a great system in place, but we can make it better. And the Tanker Safety Panel studied it for us, gave us recommendations, and those are the recommendations that we're working towards.
Now, our committee recently passed the Safeguarding Canada's Seas and Skies Act with no amendments. And I understand within that act, we actually increased the number of inspectors. Is that correct? And can you address that issue and why it was increased?
Well, we increased the National Aerial Surveillance Program, or NASP as I call it. And again, as I said, I'm very happy that the committee passed C3 because it allows this program to get doubling of their funds, and that allows them more time in the air and more time to be able. They also, most recently, I can tell you that they spotted a sailboat that was in distress, and they rescued people who were out of water and out of food. They were able to call into the Coast Guard to tell that they'd spotted somebody. So having eyes in the sky is really important in terms of looking for spills and looking for leaks, but as well, it's good for safety in general too.
How much more time do I have, Mr. Chair?
About 45 seconds or a little more.
Okay, may we turn to the clean water for transportation? I understand there's a 686% increase for that particular program. Can you explain to us what that is about?
Again, yeah. Yeah, certainly.
That amount is actually attributed to the world-class tanker safety system funding, and there's a total of almost $16 million of increased funding, and of that, there's about $15 million that's going for operating resources, such as the National Aerial Surveillance Program, as well as the increased inspections that you were referring to, and so for some capital money that is required to equip our aircraft to do that kind of surveillance. So it's all additional new money that was given to the department because of the world-class tanker safety system.
So can we be assured then as Canadians that with these changes and with the increase in funding that our system will be world-class?
Absolutely. That's the intention, is to make sure that what we have in place is world-class, and the recommendations that we've received, we're working and we're discussing with industry, and we'll continue to strengthen our system, and that is absolutely the goal.
Thank you.
Your time has expired. Mr. Sullivan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Minister, for being here. Via rail. Estimates are very difficult to fathom with via rail because most of them, last year at least, were in the supplementary estimates as opposed to the main estimate. So we have a main estimate that's $4 million less than last year's main estimate. But I want to approach it from the notion of the spending on capital that the federal government did in 2007, 2009 that is extended into this year and is continuing to be spent a little bit. There was $501 million of capital expenditures over the past 6 years, all of which was in Ontario. So, Madam Minister, when the communities between Miramichi and Bathurst are threatened with the removal of their passenger train service as a result of CN abandoning a line, and the federal government apparently doesn't have $10 million to help out New Brunswick. Why is the federal government willing to help Ontario but not New Brunswick?
We're very proud of our investment in Via Rail over the past number of years, and it's actually in the billion-dollar range, what we've done in terms of capital. Currently, and I wouldn't contrast that with respect to New Brunswick. Via Rail provided their business plan, and they indicated the areas in which they needed capital improvements, and that's what we funded, and we followed their business plan, and this is what they came to us with. What I can say with respect to New Brunswick is what I've been saying in the House, which is CN is in the process of abandoning that line, that portion of the line. They have asked the federal government if they'd like to purchase it as they go through their process in the CTA, and we've indicated no. One thing to note is it's not the cessation of Via Rail service, as there is another route through New Brunswick, but I do take the point that their concern is that it's going to be in the Miramichi-Campbellville area that would be losing service. We are working with Via Rail on the issue. We understand the concerns of people in New Brunswick regarding the matter, but at the end of the day, Via Rail is in the position to take decisions that they have to do in order to make sure that they're running as efficiently as possible based upon what their passenger network is. But it doesn't mean that we can't continue to have conversations about the matter as we progress through the CTA process that CN is in. So we'd, as I've indicated to my colleagues in New Brunswick, we'll continue to have discussions around it and understand what their concerns are. But Via Rail will not be ceasing service through that portion, through New Brunswick, because they do have an alternate route to take.
Except the alternate route goes through Plaster Rock and nobody lives there. That's the problem, I guess. And there's a whole lot of people that live between Miramichi and Bathurst who need the train. Switching gears a little bit to the issue of rail safety and the DOT 111 tank cars, which as far back, I think, as 1991, were deemed to be unsafe for transportation of dangerous goods. And it's you'll have noted, and your officials have noted, that there's been a 600-fold increase in the use of these cars for transportation of dangerous goods in Canada when crude oil is considered a dangerous good. It isn't currently considered a dangerous good in the same manner by Transport Canada. At least that's what they told us in committee in November, was that the DOT 111s are safe for the transportation of crude oil, but they're looking at that. So two things. One, it appears that Transport Canada has not yet done a risk analysis of this 600-fold increase in the transportation of what is, as we've discovered in Lac-Mégantic, a dangerous good. But in addition, you suggested that we should be following the same kinds of regulations that are going on in the States. And as I am aware, the U.S. is way ahead of us in some aspects of that. They have now ordered trains to go slow through cities. We have not. They have ordered that trains not go through certain cities, certain large cities. We have not. And so what is the ministry doing about making our system as safe as that in the U.S.?
So our system, I'm very proud of what our system is, and we compare very well to the United States. Now, what you're referring to is a recent directive that came out of the United States and with respect to the operation of trains and what they should be doing. We already have those standards here in Canada. We already have a decreased level of speed for certain goods. The difficulty with respect to rerouting, which the United States is looking at, is we simply don't have the same amount of infrastructure that they do or the same amount of options that they do in terms of a rail network. But let me just back it up by saying we've worked very hard with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities on their concerns with respect to transportation of dangerous goods in communities. And we issued a protective directive to ensure that they're receiving the information that they can and that the communication between the railways and the communities is there so that they can talk about the transportation of dangerous goods in their area as well, too. The DOT 111 cars, as I mentioned earlier, and just for your sake, we are going to phase out the old DOT 111s. And the point of decision is how long will it take to phase out the old DOT 111s. We've already taken a step that the United States has not taken, and that is we have published new regulations that we'd like to pass in the Gazette to ensure that any construction of new tank cars are to a higher standard. That does not exist in the United States. What it is a loose agreement in the industry that this is what we'll build to. We are implementing it into regulation to ensure that it's in place. And as I mentioned as well, too, the Transportation Safety Board gave us 3 recommendations in January. I'm mindful of the time in which I have to report back to the Transportation Safety Board. So we're going to be working with those advisory committees that we set up in order to discuss transportation of dangerous goods, means of containment, classification, and of course response and ERAPs. And with those things in hand, we'll be able to set policy moving forward and make some decisions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tote, you have the last 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I just wanted to start with to put on the record the fact, there has been some questions here about the cold weather, and we've heard many comments about the fact, Canada is cold, so why would the cold weather be affecting the trains this year? But I can attest to the fact in Manitoba, where I'm from, we set a record, over 100-year record in the month of December for the coldest December we've had in over 100 years. December, January combined, the second coldest in over 100 years. So it has been an extremely cold winter, and I'm not saying that to excuse anybody, but we have to deal with the reality, and to make it sound like this has not been an extraordinary cold winter, like as some people have done, is not a fair thing to do. So I just wanted to make sure that's there. And definitely anybody who's on the prairies, whether you're from a rural or an urban setting, understands the importance of agriculture and how important it is to our economy in the prairies, and the need to address this situation as quickly as we can, and also to look at the long term. So I'm glad to hear that there is, both a short-term outlook and a long-term outlook of how we're going to deal with this going forward, and to make sure that we don't run into this situation again in the future. It is very, very important for our prairie regions. I just wanted to touch a little bit on the DOT 111s also, because you talked about some of the enhancements to them and the standards that we're going to put in on the new DOT 111s. And I think it would be important. We talked about the time frame, and I'm glad to hear that you made the statement that 10 years is too long. I'm glad that that we're trying to be very aggressive on this moving forward. But I think it's also important for a good understanding of what the new standards will be, and maybe you could speak to that. What the new standards for the DOT 111s would be.
And that's a great question, because there's another set of discussions that are happening. We have published in the Gazette what we believe is the standard that should be built to, and it's something that the industry has been abiding by since 2011. So there is a good amount of improved DOT 111s on the rails currently, and that are being purchased. And we wanted to ensure that we embedded it in regulation, and that's what we're doing. But then there's another discussion happening in the United States, and that has to do with, well, what beyond this new regulatory aspect, what would a new DOT 111 car look like? And those are discussions that are happening within the systems down there, and we're monitoring, and we're part of it, and the railways in Canada are part of it as well, too. Because the goal of everybody is to ensure that we move dangerous goods and crude and whatever is inside them as safely as possible. And that's something that all industry can do. Irving Oil, 2 weeks ago, made the decision that they would not accept cars that were not to the new standard that we just published in regulation. That was a business decision they made, and I commend them for it, because they are doing something without having to be forced to do it by regulation. And I would expect that other industries and other companies and other shippers out there would be taking a look at the DOT 111 cars and the recommendations that have been made over the years and coming to the same conclusion, while we continue to do what we're doing on our side in making sure that we have that regulatory or that policy oversight on moving as quickly as we can, given the conditions we have with respect to the United States. So there's a number of conversations taken. Both sides of the border in transportation are seized with this issue. It's a very important issue, and it's important that we get it correct and that we can work together, and that we do so without having a detrimental impact upon our supply chain and our prosperity.
Just continuing a little bit on the rail safety aspect of it, I understand that you asked your advisory council to get back to you with recommendations on rail safety, and I'm just wondering if you can give us an update on those recommendations.
So all the industry-led groups did respond in the time frame, and they provided us some good reports, which we published on our website in both official languages. And the officials are going through them right now, developing recommendations and advice for us on how to proceed forward. And as I said earlier, I'm mindful of the fact that we do have a deadline with respect to response to the Transportation Safety Board, and we're doing our work right now on how to respond and what to do moving forward with respect to the matters that are before us.
And just one last question that I wanted to ask, and that's actually in regards to rail crossings. Especially in the city of Winnipeg, we have a lot of grade crossings, and I understand there's some work that is going forward on, especially since the tragic accident that we had here with OC Transpo and the Via Rail train collision, and that there's a real close look at grade crossing safety measures. And I wonder if you could expand on those, because that's something that's very, very important to my area of Manitoba.
For 20 years, there's been conversations going on between municipalities and owners of rail about what is acceptable in terms of grade crossing. And because fundamentally you want to make sure that if there's an intersection of people with rail, you want to make it as safe as possible. One thing we do have in the department is a program to help and assistance for closing some of these crossings, and I'm proud that we fund that and that we disperse grants in that way. But more importantly, we actually did get agreement, and we proceeded with respect to publishing new regulations on grade crossings, and I think that's incredibly important to ensure that municipalities and the rail work together with respect. And it's not just about safety, it's about timing, it's about signaling, there's a lot embedded in there, and it's a great coup that we were able to move these forward into Gazette, and I look forward to the closing of the commentary period and moving on the process and having them in place.
Okay, thanks very much. Our time has run out, and I know you have cabinet you got to get to, Minister, but I'm going to give you the opportunity. If you have any closing comments you want to make, fine.
I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm in your hands on this, but as you know, I had made a recommendation to the committee that you continue to study the transportation of dangerous goods, and I would hope the committee would consider that study on an urgent basis, and that you would start receiving comments and representations on that matter. I think it's really important that we continue to focus, and it's not just what we do here in government, it's what you can do as well to ensure the safety for our Canadian communities and citizens. I think it's really important work, and I appreciate you guys moving forward on it.
Okay, well, thank you. And on that note, I can tell you, Minister, that our first meeting back after the break is we're going right into that with witnesses. So thanks again to you and Mr. Lapointe, Mr. Levesque, Ms. Borges. Thanks for being here. And I just ask, we're going to have to go into camera to deal with some committee business. So if I could ask everyone except for staff to please vacate as quickly as possible. Thank you. We'll just recess for a couple minutes.